Good evening and welcome everyone. This is the culmination of our budget workshops. This is budget workshop number 3. And I'm going to take you through this evening the largest portion of our budget in terms of dollars. Like the last budget meeting, you may recall, we went through the greatest number of different budget areas for the instructional components. And as a recap, number 1 was about the operational areas and administrative areas. But this evening, we're going to go through staffing and benefits, which is in any district across the state is the large majority of anyone's budget. We'll also talk about our interfund transfer to capital, our community schools monies, revenues, the tax rate, which is always extremely important to this community that I've learned over the last few years. I mean, like any community, but really putting into terms that they can fully grasp and understand when they're making a decision whether or not to support a budget. And then also, we'll talk about grant funding. So when we talk about staffing, you've heard me say this at the onset, that when we began the budget development process, we had concerns going into it for a litany of reasons, but we made a promise to this community that we were going to be lean in terms of what our asks were, recognizing fully that over the past 3 years, excluding last year, the 3 years prior to that, we were having big increases in our staffing. And rightfully so, because we were taking all the professionals that we had brought in as part of our academic supports to address learning loss for our students and finding ways to incorporate that into the budget. So during those years, we did see large increases to the tune of almost 200 FTEs. And we promised then that we were going to be scaling that back. Last year was reflective of that. This year, once again, a lot of numbers on here, but the next slide is a summary of what we're looking at in terms of staffing, because really the numbers are these. We are looking now to try to supplement the pressures that we've seen internally. So when you have, staff members that are nearly 1,600 in totality, and you've had such large increases on the instructional side, on the operational side, we felt the pressure internally, primarily on our payroll department, but also on our accounting department too, as the number of transactions have increased. So what we're proposing to increase is 1 FTE for the purposes of increasing the clerical staff in the business office. It would be an account clerk position, and they would be split between accounting and payroll, probably looking at a 70-30 split payroll to accounting. We're also looking to add a maintenance mechanic 3 to our plant facilities department. You know that this is something that I've been talking about over the last few years, doing more with our dollars, stretching them further. And that really means where we can, pulling projects back from outside contracted vendors and doing them in-house. We've hired very skilled people in those positions over the past few years, and we're looking to bolster that by bringing another person on, especially with the introduction now of our new HVAC units at all of our buildings as with this bond. This would be an area that's of great importance to us. But if you just look at the number of things that we've had to do in the last year to do our own internal repairs, particularly in the areas of plumbing, in the areas of heating, this is a big concern to us. So we think bringing on another maintenance mechanic 3 would help us to do that and address our district-wide needs in our buildings, especially with them aging. And then the last is to reduce a half of an FTE. We used to have a sub-caller position. That has now been taken on since the retirement of that individual. We've been taking that on in-house in Dr. Cohen's area. His staff specifically has been doing this, so we've reduced that by 0.5 FTE. But when we talk about the employee benefits that are related to this, you see a lot of yellow highlighted. There's some significant numbers on this page. These are the big budget drivers for what we're going to see in terms of the culmination of our budget today. But the few that I've highlighted for you, you see a $573,000 increase on our ERS line. That's because our average increase is over 10% for this year. And that represents that number that you see there. When you look at our what I call our non-professional staff, our non-teacher certified staff. On our TRS line, we're lucky enough to have received a decrease on our employer contribution rate of nearly 14% from the prior year, thankfully, and that is going to represent a $951,000 decrease on that line. So it helps to offset that significantly. But then when we look at our Social Security, we're up over 200,000 on that line. Federal changes now to our annual wage cap is up almost 5%. So it's 4.77%. So our financial obligation now increases as such. And that's why you see such a big increase there. But the big one that's going to jump out at you certainly is on our health insurance line. We talked about it in the first budget workshop. I told you right away that was going to be one of our biggest external factors. I'm sorry to say that it didn't disappoint, because certainly that has a huge impact on what we've been doing. I was really optimistic as we were going through the budget process. We were really doing yeoman's work. Everyone here, everyone that was at the last two meetings, really just to sharpen pencils and do what we could. But when it affects this line this much, and we have to meet this obligation for our staff, and rightfully so, but we're talking to the tune of just over $3 million for our health increases, because we're looking at increases upwards of 9.7% on average. Now we talk about our debt service and our interfund transfers. The two that I want to call your attention to are the two that we've been talking about the most here. The debt transfer to debt service line, you're going to see a $500,000 increase there. That is now for our first installment of our borrowing for phase one, we're going to call it, of our bond borrowing. So you know where we've engaged in all aspects of the bond project, but our first borrowing now is going to take place this year. And in year one, it's only going to be that principal payment is going to increase that line by nearly $500,000. Excuse me, out of the total 85 million that we're going to be borrowing in totality for this bond. Now we're going to be talking more about that at an upcoming board meeting. We're going to take the community through what it looks like now versus what we had thought it would look like then, because right now the impacts are going to be less than we had anticipated. In the overlap years, the borrowing is still going to be the same, but in the overlap years where we're going to be borrowing on our debt service lines, we're hoping that the impact is going to be less. And then on our transfer to capital fund, we're going to go more through this on the next slide, but the line is 2.5 million. That includes a $500,000 increase. The board may recall that this was upwards of 3 million years ago. And I've always stressed the importance of this particular line in our budget, because this is the ability for us to do smaller capital projects without the need to borrow. So by incorporating it into the budget, like I said, at one point it was 3 million. We were able to do a lot of those things in-house without going out. I mean, not in-house, meaning not without borrowing, but it really gave us a lot of flexibility. You may recall we wiped that number out when COVID hit, and we've been slowly over the years now bringing that back. And this is the proposed interfund transfer to capital that I just was talking about. This, as you heard Trustee Krieger mention earlier, this was something that was vetted out before the Buildings and Operations Committee. And it changed from the time we started the year till even from our February meeting to the time we just made the recommendation to the board. We discussed a lot of different projects at the time. But as we've gone through this year, and I've told this to you before, that we're listening to the feedback that we're getting. We're looking and seeing the things that are happening throughout the year. And it's becoming more and more apparent that the number of issues related to our bathrooms and our septic lines in particular has been extremely problematic this year. And our staff and also our contractor staff, we've expended extraordinary monies in this regard this year. So we know now that we need to perform these upgrades not only for the benefit of our staff, our students, and our visitors. It's almost an ambassador. When you're coming to our buildings, that's one of the things that you're seeing. Besides our auditoriums, you're seeing our bathrooms, probably more so than you're even seeing our classrooms. And we know, though, that doing these bathrooms is important, but it's not just at these three buildings. I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, but that's where we're looking to focus these monies based on estimates that we've received from our architects and through our building condition survey. But also in here, we have $1 million allocated toward the abatement for the soil, asbestos abatement and remediation that we need to do, that we've shared throughout this process. We know that those numbers could exceed then what we have available in our approved community funds for our bond. And so we're looking to utilize this funding source to supplement that. Now, if the bidding should come back on these, and we determine as we go through this funding, and this is going to be a little bit tricky because I'm going to show you on the next slide, less than that. If we get very aggressive bidding, we come in under these numbers. We do have the right to then do other projects. So the committee has identified where we would go after that. We could do other bathroom upgrades at either South Ocean or Eagle, would be next on the list. We can continue with the asbestos floor tile removal, that abatement project that we talked about last year. You may recall in the interfund transfer, we put aside 1.24 million, I believe was the number for that. Or we could look at other projects within the BCS that are listed there. That would be the order which we would do these projects. But I keep talking about this next list because it became very apparent that when we were looking at the bathrooms, trying to figure out how we could do this, those weren't the only 3 buildings that were in need of these repairs and these necessity. We also have significant upgrades needed at these particular buildings: Oregon, Saxton, Canaan, River, and Tremont. But in addition, their parking lots were on our radar for a while as well. And the level of the parking lot repairs, might not be coating, there might be some remilling work that needs to be done, can be significant. But the reason I share that, why we made put these on this list as opposed to the other, is we need to tie parking lot projects into an inside project that we're working on in order to receive aid on all the projects in totality. So because we want to get our full building aid back on the monies that we expend, we want to make sure that we have a bathroom project associated, or an interior project, but we've signed it to bathrooms, associated with any parking lot projects that we do. And once again, should there be monies remaining, we would look to do parking lot and bathroom improvements at South Ocean or Eagle, or other capital projects that are listed in that BCS report. Now, the big blue box is important too. I included this in this presentation because it's important to say, we to understand how interfund transfer fits into our overall mission in terms of what are our objectives and what we're trying to accomplish with this budget. But I want to make sure that it's very clear, this is something that requires a separate vote. The capital reserve is voted on by the community in terms of setting it up to create as a quote unquote savings bank, right? We're going to use that as a savings account, rather, that we're going to save money for future use. When we have monies to the point where we want to expend, now we say, okay, we're going to have $5 million in this account. Now we have to ask the community for their permission to expend it. This will be a separate proposition voted on separate and apart from the budget, but is going to have its own proposition, which you'll see there, which is lengthy, and it goes through in detail the things I was just talking about. Now, also in this is our community schools. So when we talked about aid, we talked about our community schools set aside is unchanged in the governor's proposal. That's all that we have at this time is the governor's proposal. But what we do within our community schools is, you may recall a few years back, we broke out social and emotional learning and family center as their own separate budget areas because we had all the money lumped into one area called community schools. We make sure that we allocate monies in these areas to make sure that we meet that allocation so that we do not leave any dollars on the table unexpended. So the numbers will come in higher than that $900,000 number we're getting in aid, but we have this in the budget. So we'll move the monies around depending on the salaries as staff may change or contractual increases, but really in totality, we're not looking at anything here but a reduction overall on the 3 lines. Similar in our thought process is our district-wide codes and our superintendent initiatives. So our district-wide codes, this is where we have our monies for our buildings, for their supplies, like for the main office. Those are not in those academic areas that we talked about in the previous budget workshop that we talked about. So we've kept that flat. That's just in accordance with what we've talked about, keeping the budget lean. The same with the superintendent initiatives. We've kept that flat. You'll see a $5,000 flip-flop, if you will, not knowing what the new superintendent will want. The new superintendent may want something more along the lines of equipment purchases. We could always transfer out of equipment, but we can't transfer into it. So we just moved monies out of the contractual area, put them in equipment so that we have a net increase of 0, but just to give the superintendent a little bit more discretion because clearly we don't know what their plans are. But in summary, this evening, these budget areas they will, in summary, will total about $3.3 million in terms of the budget increase, an increase of 4.24% over what last year's budget was for the same respective areas. Now we'll talk about how this now plays into where we are in totality. So we look at our revenues. So when we talk about revenues, the big two are your property taxes and your state aid. Those comprise nearly 80 to 90% of anyone's budget, particularly ours. On our property taxes line, you'll see that we have an increase of $4.2 million. That is a levy to levy increase of 3.15%. And and on the next slide, you're going to see I've summarized these for you to make it easier because I know there's a lot of numbers on this one. I'm just calling out where these numbers come from. On the state sources line, you'll see the increase of $1.5 million. You may say, well, Frank, you were talking about 1.8 at the first budget workshop. Remember, we're looking at just using the governor's numbers at this time for the executive proposal. That's all we have. They're supposed to come together and have a budget approved by April 1st. It does not look like they're going to meet that date again. Once again, I always tell you that we're putting forth a budget that we have to adopt, not knowing fully what the state is going to give us. But we'll talk about that missing $300,000 on the next slide. But that is a 1.52% increase. So the budget itself will be the budget increase will be $6.9 million for a total of $252 million on a budget. That is a budget to budget appropriation increase of 2.83%. And in the last column, I wanted to just call your attention to, I'm going to spend more time on this on a future slide, but the contingent budget, you'll see changes there and you'll see a lot of red. So I'll explain what contingent budget is and why we have those decreases there. But first, let's do a quick recap. Oh, yes.
I see a federal decrease of $100,000. What is that?
That should be on the, that's the federal
On the
source.
very budget projections, revenue.
Yeah, of course. Oh, I see now.
In a different budget line. Okay. Okay, thank you.
So on the grant slide, we don't have the numbers yet released by New York State Education Department, but we are expecting or projecting that our allocations will be the same. But we did show this is that 300,000 I was telling you about on the UPK line, Universal Pre-K. If you remember, they had an allocation for our district upwards of $334,000. So we put that in there, assuming, like I said, that we will have at the most. Certainly, we're only going to be able to claim what it is we use, depending on the number of students we have in the programs. But our changes to the account codes that were previously presented. So this is a pretty hefty slide because based on budget workshops number 1 and 2, I gave you a summation of those slides. And after we finalized going through all of the benefits, particularly the impact that the health insurance line had, we had to now scale back in different areas. So we had to take a very evasive look in terms of where we had monies that we think we have to reduce. Or we're hoping, because like I said, we look at forecasting. So we had to scale back some of our expectations. Some are on the smaller side, like toward the bottom. On our utilities, those 3 lines total, $50,000 in reductions on what we think our estimates are. Others, we had to go back upwards of 9, 10, 11 years in terms of looking at historical data for some of our BOCES lines to see where we could have additional savings. And we're doing this based on averages. Certainly, we find ourselves in a situation like this where we have to reduce the budgets that we presented by $1.3 million. We need to find significant dollars. So, you see some big numbers on that slide in terms of, let's see, $200,000 on our multi-peril property insurance. We told you that we had estimates that we had last time in terms of our insurance numbers. We're hopeful to find better numbers. That may mean us taking a harder look at our insurance coverages for next year. So we're going to be very busy having some significant meetings over the summer with our insurance firm, if not perhaps going out to an RFP. It may result in that. Looking at our handicap transportation, that's another line that we're looking at. Prof and Tech, that was one that we had to go back almost a decade in terms of looking at some of the dollars there. And it's very important when we just consider outside placements, why it's so important to bring back our students in-house because of the savings it represents to us, and why it's important to satisfying our budget, meeting our budget needs. I do apologize. I read that multi-peril line wrong. It was the handicap line that was down. The multi-peril is a $36,000 increase. That was because we had a meeting, and that was for the flood insurance. They gave us great coverage to the tune of almost $500,000 on all of our buildings. And we thought for a district, especially with us having the water so close, why we wouldn't do it for a number so low to get coverage numbers that high. That was very important to us. There are some other increases on there. The bus estimate came out higher than when we presented back in January for that line. The art equipment line, that was Mr. Brinkman moving monies around because the kiln broke down. He needs to purchase a new kiln. That is an equipment purchase. So it's important we capture that $10,000 in the equipment line. So he was just reallocating funds that were already in there. So it's a net increase of zero, but that's why you see the 3,800 and the 6,200 coming out of those codes, but going into the equipment line. And then there's a $40,000 increase because there's some increased costs associated with our public relations that were not presented at the last budget workshop. So in summary, as I mentioned, this is all the major categories and the totals by area. But as I mentioned, the budget is just over $252 million. It is just under $7 million in terms of its increase, which is 2.83%. But the next line you see on the bottom there is the changes that we would need to make to our budget to arrive at what's called a contingent budget, which is what's called a zero levy increase. So that should be, if the budget doesn't pass, the board has basically three options. The board can either put up the same exact budget for a second vote. They can put up a changed budget. The budget can go either up or down as the board sees fit, or the board can decide to move right to a contingent budget without a vote. And that budget, though, is a contingent budget, has parameters that are automatically associated with it, which I'm going to go through. But first, quickly, here's the totals again for you. This is to make it easier for you. The 2.83% is a budget-to-budget appropriation increase. Once again, includes an interfund transfer to capital projects of $2.5 million. And importantly, once again, we are not looking to pierce the tax cap with this budget. The levy increase is 3.15%. Again, this is not the tax rate. This is the tax levy. I'll go through the tax rate in a moment. But I always put this last bullet in because it's always important to share with the board and the community that you're going to see a lot of numbers now in Newsday, and you're going to see varying numbers from one district to the next. And everyone's like, well, we all live in a tax cap world of 2%. Why does Pat Med have a 3.15% increase and so-and-so has a 1.79 and so-and-so's got a 6.31? It's because it's going to change from district to district based on the exclusions in your budget. So when we talk about tax rate, our tax levy is just over $4 million. That's that 3.15 number that I just went over with you. Our tax percentage, though, increase for our property taxes comes in at 3.29 to 4.34%. And the reason we share a range is that's assuming either a 0% decline in assessed valuation or upwards of a 1% decline. Because as I share each year, the property tax rate will increase as your assessed valuation goes down. And that's the number we want to project for the community. Certainly it's a pessimistic outlook, but I want to give them a worst case scenario. And you may recall we used to do a 0 to 2% range, but I adjusted that because in the last 13 years, we've only gone over a 1% declination one time in 13 years. So I'd rather give them a more realistic number so they can really kind of hone in on where this is. But truthfully, That 3.29 to 4.34%, whenever we present that range, we've typically been coming in under that, because as assessed valuation goes up, the tax rate goes down. So we've been fortunate enough to come in under that budget. So in the last 6 years, 5 of the 6 years, we've been actually under that number. So that's a good thing to have, because that, like I said, we want the community to know what it would be, like I said, in a worst case scenario. So when you look at that and you say, well, what's the average home in our district? The assessed valuation based on a $2,800 value by the town of Brookhaven, that's an average home in our district. Okay, with no decline in assessed value, okay, that number would be $285 for the entire year to support this budget. So some notable highlights. Once again, I think we prepared a fiscally responsible budget. And when I say we, once again, I have to stress, it's been a top to bottom collaborative effort by everyone involved. Can't say enough about the people that I work side by side with to make this happen. It maintains all academic programs. We're not cutting programs. It includes improvements to our buildings to improve, address the needs of our buildings that are aging, and also does not result in the accessing of any staff members. That is not the story you're going to hear from a lot of districts. I'm telling you now. There are a lot of districts you're going to hear about Newsday that are accessing staff, and there's several districts, I think there might even be a high number, that are looking to pierce the cap this year. This does include, as I mentioned, the new account clerk position in the business office to reduce the demands on payroll and accounting offices. It does include the addition of a new maintenance mechanic, as I mentioned, in our plant facilities department to help with increasing building repairs. And then it does also continue the Radar Academy program that we implemented 2 years ago. That's maintaining that program, because we believe that that's got to take some time to start bringing more and more students back to getting a good education on campus. Now, these are the contingent budget impacts that I was alluding to on the former slides, that zero levy increase. So when you have a zero levy increase, it means that the cuts to the budget would total $4.2 million to result in a budget totaling $247 million. Some of the caveats to this are all equipment purchases are removed from the budget. Removes the $2.5 million interfund to capital. That comes out of the budget as well. And then we've got to look to eliminate positions and or supplies or contractual needs throughout the budget, maintaining the ratio. So we've got to maintain the admin to program to capital components of the budget. Those are done on a percentage basis. So when we looked at this, what we would need to do is not only do we automatically eliminate the new positions that we've talked about, we would have to eliminate 5 administrative positions in this budget. It would also require us to remove 4 clerical staff, 2 being full-time positions and 2 part-time. And it would require us including, all the benefits associated with those positions, obviously. And then we would have to reduce certain supplies. Travel and conference is one that we look to eliminate first as well. But that's, once again, if the board should decide we have to go to a contingent budget. Now, some important dates. On April 27th, that's the last day that we can transmit the property tax report card to the state. We typically do this after the board gives us the approval of the budget. So once we have the board's approval, we will look to transmit that, but we cannot do that any later than April 27th. On the 30th, we're looking to have the budget brochure sent out. All the copies of the budget will be online. We always make sure we post that to our website, but we look to mail out our budget brochure material to share that with the community, to make sure that the residents have the information they need so that they're fully informed to be able to vote. We will do a budget hearing, which is a culmination of everything we've talked about through our budget development process. We'll do that on May 7th. In between, we're going to have the road show that I'll be doing at all the different buildings, not just internally, but also at external organizations. We'll do it with the PTA Council. We'll do it at the Medford Civic Association. And on May 19th, that is the date of the budget vote and the Board of Education election. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Frank, can the community still go on the website and punch in their address? And do we still have that?
Yep. That's a great point. Thank you for that. Yeah, we're going to look to do that again. We will do that. We usually update that now in April. So what Trustee Andrade is referring to is for the past few years, we put together what we call like a property tax tutorial. I think the community's found it very beneficial because what we do is we take now this budget, load it in, and kind of run the numbers from the assessed valuation of properties from 1,500 upwards of, I think, 13,000. And we run it so they can see what the impact would be with this budget on their home to make it easier. And then we also provide links to where they can find the information on the town's website so they can quickly find what's my property, what's the assessed valuation for my property. So yes, we'll do that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to thank you and your staff and all of the department heads and all of the people that pulled their budgets together to keep everything. I know that there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot of uncertainty going on with monies moving around and what the budgets are doing and what the stock market is doing. And I think what you guys done here is really, really good work, protecting the community, protecting our staff, protecting the programming for the children, for the students. And I really want to thank you for your everybody's hard work. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But like I said, this is a top to bottom effort, started with the board all the way down. If we don't have the buy-in at that level and continuing, I think we don't accomplish the things that we've done. And like I said, we remain steadfast in our commitment to this community. We talk about things, we shared it with them, and then we try to deliver on them. And we've done that the last few years. And like I said, it's not easy. It's hard sometimes. No, I'm not always the favorite person when I'm showing people that I've got to either cut off spending or reduce their budget. Mr. Richwaltz, I didn't go over that, but that's a $320,000 decrease. And meanwhile, I said, this is the year we're making it happen. So now we've got to go to work and figure out where else can we find monies to get those devices in. So, a lot of work that needs to be done. But like I said, this is what we get charged to do.
Can I just, so for Proposition 2, is
Yes.
there someplace, either when you go around on your roadshow or on the website, where we could kind of talk about what the capital reserve is and in the past, what that money has allowed us to do and the freedom of having it and
Sure.
how we,
I mean,
how
a
it's
history of
helped
how
us.
we've
Yeah,
used the capital
how-
reserve over the years.
Yeah, and how it's helped us so that
Sure.
people understand why it
Yeah.
would be a good thing to have.
It's a great point because like I said, anytime you can do it without bonding, right? And
Yeah.
and think about that. This district up until before 24 hadn't bonded in 20 plus years. So the fact that we now have it and we're seeing the impact of bonding and the fact that we can do those projects. Now, once again, on a smaller scale, 2.5 million is not going to change all of these things, but it's a really important element to our budget to be able to do these things because we have a lot of work to do here. We recognize it. I'm constantly trying to find efficiencies. And I make people crazy in the process of doing it. I'm not going to lie because I keep saying until someone tells me, no, I can't do it, we keep trying to find a way because it's important enough to do it. So yes, that's a great idea. And I'll look to incorporate that certainly. Yeah.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Appreciate your time this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Frank.
I'd curtsy, but I'm not wearing the right clothes for it.
Is everyone okay with adopting the budget tonight? Is everyone okay with adopting the budget tonight? Adopting, yes, the budget, so I could do the motions. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Okay, just want to make sure. Just want to make sure. Okay. So we recommend, whereas the Board of Education has considered several drafts of general fund spending plan, and whereas the Board of Education has received estimates of its income for fiscal 2026, 2027, now therefore be it resolved that a general fund budget for the fiscal 2026, 2027 is adopted in the amount of $252,223,893. This results in the budget increase of 2.83% and an estimate tax levy increase of $4,237,687 or 3.15%, which does not exceed the district tax cap. So can I have a motion to recommend?
Motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then the second one is the approval of proposition. So be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby authorizes the placement of a proposition to expend the monies from the district's capital reserve fund established on May 17, 2022 at the annual budget vote an election on May 19th, 2026, and directs the district clerk to place said proposition in the annual notice of said vote and election. Shall the Board of Education of the Patchogue-Medford Union Free School District be authorized to expend from the Capital Reserve Fund, which was established on May 17th, 2022, pursuant to Section 3651 of the Education Law, for the following capital improvement projects. 1. Parking lot and bathroom upgrades at Oregon Middle School, Saxton Middle School, Canaan Elementary School, River Elementary School, Tremont Elementary School, South Ocean Middle School, and Eagle Elementary School. And 2. Any project listed in the 2022 Building Condition Survey in the approximate amount of $5 million and other work required in connection therewith, and to expend from the reserve fund, therefore including preliminary cost and cost incidental thereto on an amount not to exceed the estimate total cost of $5 million. So can I have a motion?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion?
All right. Thank you, everyone. Meeting
Thank
at 9:10.
Well done.